on what would you do if the moment you waited for your entire life, your only child's wedding, turned into your greatest humiliation, when everything you gave, all the love and years of devotion, got tossed aside with a single, cruel sentence: stay in your lane. This is the story of how I did exactly that, and in doing so, I took everything with me. Make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Chapter. I still remember the moment Andrew told me he was getting married. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in April. The early spring light was pouring through the kitchen windows, bouncing off the polished counter that I'd cleaned maybe 20 minutes earlier, out of sheer habit. I was making tea, the same way I always did, the same mug, the same brand, the same 3-minute steep. Some things don't change when you've spent over 5 decades learning to appreciate the small things. He sat across from me at the table, twiddling with his phone, tapping his foot. I thought he was just distracted. I had no idea he was about to drop a bombshell. Then he said it. "Mom, I proposed." Taylor said yes. For a second, everything in the room slowed down. I looked up at him and he looked proud, nervous maybe, hopeful. And just like that, I felt it. That old, familiar ache in my chest. Not the bad kind. The kind that comes when something you never dared dream is finally about to happen. My baby boy was getting married, and for a few precious seconds, I was allowed to believe that this moment, this massive, once-in-a-lifetime moment, was going to be ours. That after years of being just Mom, and then years of being just Margaret the widow, I was about to become something again. Something bigger. I smiled so hard my face hurt. "That's wonderful, Andrew. Oh, honey, I'm so happy for you both." I pictured the wedding, the dress, the flowers, the ceremony. I pictured myself back in the world I had loved and left, wedding planning. After all, I had done it for 35 years before retiring. People knew my name in Boston's bridal circles. I had coordinated everything from tiny barn weddings in the Berkshires to 6-figure galas in Beacon Hill. But this would be different. This would be our wedding. "I already have some ideas," I said, almost laughing with excitement. "Not to interfere, of course. It's your day. But I'd love to help with the planning, even just a little. I still have my book of contacts," and that's when I saw it. That hesitation in his eyes. And for the first time in what would become a pattern, Andrew looked away. "Actually," he said slowly, "Taylor kinda already has a vision. She's really into, like, modern minimalist stuff. She follows this planner on social media who does amazing work. She's already thinking of reaching out." I blinked. "Oh, I see. But it's a family event. I figured maybe I could just be part of some decisions. Not all of it. Just a bit." That's when it came. The sentence I'd hear again, echoing through everything that followed. The one that would shift everything. She said, and please don't take this the wrong way, but she said it'd be best if you just stayed in your lane. It took me a full 5 seconds to respond. I smiled. Too big, too fake, like I didn't understand. Because at that moment, I didn't want to. "Stayed in my lane?" I repeated, still smiling, hoping he'd laugh and say it was a joke, that he didn't mean it, that she didn't mean it. He just nodded. "She thinks it'll be smoother that way. You know how she is. She just wants to avoid confusion. I'm sure you get it." And just like that, my joy turned into something else, something I hadn't felt in years. I excused myself a few minutes later, claiming I had a Zoom call with an old friend from my planning days. I didn't. I just needed to be alone. I sat on my bed, lights off, watching the sky darken through the window. I thought about how long I had waited for this moment, how many weddings I had built for other families, other brides, other mothers, how many times I had watched them cry tears of joy at seeing their children walk down the aisle. And now, after decades of giving, I was being told I wasn't needed. I was being asked, no, told, to stay in my lane. I didn't cry that night. I just lay there, very still, as if trying to memorize how rejection feels when it comes from your own child. And I told myself it was just a misunderstanding, that maybe Taylor didn't mean it that way, that Andrew was just trying to avoid conflict, that I could still be part of this if I just stayed calm. But deep down, something had shifted, and I had no idea then that this was only the beginning of how invisible I was about to become. I wish I had. The next few weeks passed in a blur of strained small talk and half-hearted phone calls. Andrew would check in, briefly, like he was fulfilling some sort of quiet obligation. Taylor never called. Not once. I started to notice a shift in how included I was, or rather, how excluded I'd become. I told myself it was just the busyness of engagement, that they were overwhelmed with decisions. That Taylor, being a modern woman, probably just wanted to assert her independence. I tried to be understanding, tried to be patient, but the truth is, I was already being pushed out. It all became clear one Saturday afternoon. Taylor had invited me, along with her mother and a few friends, to a casual lunch at a local cafe to talk wedding vibes. That's how she put it in the text, wedding vibe. I wasn't sure if that meant colors, decor, or just chit-chat, but I went. I dressed nicely, wore a soft peach blouse with gold earrings, something light and happy. I even brought a little folder with me, just in case. Inside, I had printed a few inspiration boards, classy, timeless looks I had curated from years of experience. Florals that worked in all seasons, tips on seating arrangements, lighting tricks to make photos magical. Nothing pushy, just ideas. When I arrived, everyone was already seated. Taylor barely looked up from her phone. "Hey," she mumbled, then turned back to her screen. Her friends nodded politely. Her mother smiled, tight and short. I sat down quietly, trying not to feel out of place. I ordered a tea, then waited for the conversation to naturally steer into the wedding. When it did, I gently opened my folder and said, "I brought a few things, just some thoughts if you want to take a look." Taylor didn't even glance at the papers. She waved a hand casually. "Oh, that's okay, Margaret. We're going for a more current look, nothing too traditional." The way she said traditional, like it was a dirty word. "I'm sure you've got a ton of great stuff from back then," she added, smiling with just enough teeth to look fake. "But weddings have really changed, right?" Her friends giggled, one of them chiming in, "Yeah, everything's on TikTok now. We're using this girl from LA. She's like so cool. She did this shoot with disco balls and neon palms and it was insane." They all nodded, chattering like I wasn't even there. I sat there holding my little folder, hands still on the edges, pretending I didn't feel the sting. Pretending I didn't just feel my 35 years of experience dismissed with a laugh. "I mean," Taylor said, "we just want something really us, you know? Not like the whole ballroom lace vintage vibe. That's just not our thing." I nodded, folded the folder shut quietly, and slipped it back into my bag. Her mom leaned over and whispered, not softly enough, "I told you she'd bring something. She probably thought she'd take over." Taylor gave her a quick look, then turned to me and said almost sweetly, "We really appreciate your excitement. Margaret, seriously, but I just want this to be modern and fresh. I already have a vision." I smiled. It felt more like a wince. "Of course, it's your day." Inside, I was breaking apart. I had seen brides like her before, confident, sure of their choices, blind to anyone else's wisdom, but I never thought I'd meet one who saw me as the problem, who saw my experience not as value, but as a threat. When I got home, I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, just sitting there, the radio playing something soft, my hands resting on the steering wheel, numb. I thought about calling Andrew, about telling him how I'd been treated, but what would I say? That his fiancée humiliated me in front of her friends? That she called my work outdated? He'd say I was overreacting, that Taylor didn't mean anything by it, that I was making things harder. So I did what I've always done. I swallowed it. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea. I changed into my softest pajamas. I watched a rerun of The Golden Girls and pretended everything was fine, but something in me was changing. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and really looked at myself. The lines around my eyes, the gray in my hair, the strength in my shoulders that I'd almost forgotten was there. And I told myself something quietly, a whisper I barely believed at the time. "You deserve better than this." I didn't know it yet, but that moment, that quiet vow, would be the start of something I couldn't undo, letting the morning chill bite at my skin. There's something about cold air that makes you feel present, alive, even when everything inside you feels numb. I kept thinking about that lunch, about Taylor's tone, her mother's whisper, the way her friends looked at me like I was a relic, like I was some charity invite they had to entertain for politeness' sake. I replayed every moment, every word, every smirk. And the worst part? Andrew hadn't called. Not to check in, not to thank me, not to ask if I was okay. I waited all day, then the next. By the third day, I gave up. He'd chosen his side, whether he realized it or not. Still, I wasn't ready to give up entirely. Not yet. I reminded myself that weddings bring stress, that couples get overwhelmed and short-tempered. Maybe Taylor didn't mean to be dismissive. Maybe her mother had gotten in her head. Maybe Andrew just didn't want to be caught in the middle. So I tried again. That week, I sent over a short email with some local vendors I trusted, all people I'd worked with for years. I kept the tone light. I ended with, "Only if it's helpful. Wishing you both a joyful planning process. Love, Mom." I didn't get a reply. Not from Taylor, not from Andrew. The silence was louder than a slammed door. A few days later, I stopped by Andrew's apartment to drop off a box of his childhood keepsakes, yearbooks, old baseball cards, a few photo albums I thought might be nice for the wedding. Taylor opened the door. She was polite. I'll give her that. But it was the kind of politeness that's practiced. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, hey, we didn't know you were coming," she said, standing in the doorway but not quite inviting me in. I held up the box. "Just thought you might want these. Maybe for some photo displays or—" "Oh," she said quickly. "That's sweet, but I think we're doing a digital thing, like a slideshow from our phones. Super casual." I nodded. "Of course. Just thought you might want a few baby photos of Andrew." She took the box but didn't look inside. Andrew appeared a few seconds later. He looked tired, or maybe just tense. "Hey, Mom," he said, giving me a quick hug. "You didn't have to bring that stuff in person. You could have just, left it by." "I was in the neighborhood," I lied. "Thought I'd say hi." Taylor cleared her throat. "Actually, we're about to head out. Venue appointment." "Oh," I said. "You found a place?" Taylor smiled. "Yeah, a rooftop downtown. It's very us, chic but not stuffy." "Sounds lovely," I said, masking the sting. "Did you consider the Elmwood estate? I know the owners. They do beautiful outdoor ceremonies." Taylor's smile tightened. "Yeah, but it's a bit dated, and we want to avoid anything that feels too, mom and dad wedding." She didn't even blink as she said it. I forced a laugh. "Right, of course." They said goodbye and closed the door before I even made it to the elevator. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my old wedding planning books, thick binders full of fabric swatches, floral sketches, vendor lists, timelines, the kind of work that took patience, passion, and precision. I had poured decades of my life into those pages, and now my own son and his fiancée had reduced it all to a punchline, outdated, dated, not their vibe. I could feel something inside me hardening. It wasn't just the exclusion. It was the way it was done, subtle, cold, with a smile that said, "Don't take it personal," while making it deeply personal. I tried one last time. I invited them for dinner. Homemade pot roast, his favorite. I set the table with linen napkins and candles. I even baked a pie from scratch, apple cinnamon, just the way Andrew liked it as a kid. They showed up 30 minutes late. Taylor complained about the smell the second she walked in. "Oh, wow, it's very intense in here. I don't really eat red meat." I smiled and said nothing. Andrew just gave me a sheepish shrug and pulled out a chair. Dinner was awkward, stiff. I tried asking about the planning, how the venue search was going, what kind of dress Taylor was thinking about. She gave me short answers, non-answers. Then, as I poured tea for everyone, I mentioned, gently, that I knew a wonderful seamstress downtown who still made custom gowns. Taylor set her cup down a little too hard. "Margaret, I know you mean well, but honestly, I just feel like you're not hearing us. We're doing things differently. It's not the 90s. We don't want a traditional wedding, and I already have someone in mind to plan everything. She's amazing. She did this eco-themed elopement in the desert that was just, wow." Andrew stayed quiet. I nodded, my hands steady even as my heart cracked. "Well," I said softly, "I hope it's everything you want it to be." Taylor smiled. "It will be. I have a very clear vision, and I just want everyone to stay in their lane so it all goes smoothly." There it was again, that phrase, "stay in your lane, your." It was no longer a request. It was a command, a declaration of where she thought I belonged, outside the lines of their life. I cleared the dishes, packed them a box of leftovers, and kissed Andrew goodbye. When the door closed behind them, I stood in the quiet, staring at the empty table. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't part of this. Not truly, and the woman I had tried so hard to embrace as family had made it perfectly clear she didn't want me in her story. Fine, I thought. You want me out? I'll stay in my lane. But you better be careful, because the road I take when I do doesn't come with a gift at the end. Taylor wasn't looking for family. She was building a stage, and I didn't fit the aesthetic. Still, I hoped Andrew might see it, that maybe, just maybe, he'd notice the lines being drawn, the way his fiancée treated me like a relic to be boxed and stored away. But hope, as I'd learned too many times, can be crueler than truth. A week later, Taylor invited me to dinner again, this time at her parents' house. A family get-together, she called it. I wasn't sure if it was an olive branch or a performance, but I went. Their house was beautiful, cold, but beautiful. Modern furniture, gray tones everywhere, not a single photo on the walls. The kind of place that looked like it had been staged for a magazine shoot, not lived in, not loved in. Taylor greeted me with the same smooth smile as always. Her mother, Diane, was already halfway into a glass of wine when I walked in. She kissed me on the cheek, her tone dripping with rehearsed charm. "Well, Margaret," she said, "Taylor tells us you used to do wedding planning? That must have been interesting work." Interesting. Like I'd once been a part-time dog walker or a quirky knitting club host. I smiled. Yes, for over 3 decades. I loved it. Helped a lot of people create memories that lasted. Diane gave a tight smile. "Well, thank goodness for Instagram now, right? So much easier these days." I glanced at Andrew. He wasn't meeting my eyes. We sat down to eat. The conversation revolved around color palettes. 54, 39, 45,000. 40, 25,000 vegan catering. Guest lists, all things I'd once breathed and lived and bled for, but now discussed like I had nothing to add. At one point, Taylor was describing some lighting feature she saw online. It's like a tunnel of LED vines that pulses with music, totally immersive. We're thinking that for the reception entrance. Interesting, I said carefully. Just be mindful with lighting that intense. Sometimes it overwhelms guests, especially older ones. Taylor interrupted, smiling tightly. I know, Margaret. That's why I'm working with someone young, someone current. The room went quiet for a beat. I felt my cheeks flush, not from shame, but from something darker, a quiet fury that clung to the back of my throat. But I swallowed it, smiled again, and took another bite of salad like nothing had happened. Later, Diane brought out old albums, hers, of course, pictures of Taylor's childhood, vacations, school dances. Taylor cooed over them. Andrew politely nodded along. I pulled out a small envelope I had brought, just a few baby pictures of Andrew, his first Halloween, his first bike ride, the toothless grin he gave me when he lost his front teeth. I thought it would be sweet to share. I handed it over. I thought maybe a few of these could go into the slideshow. They're special to me. Taylor glanced down. Oh, I mean, they're cute, but we kind of want the vibe to be more like stylized. These are very real. Real? I echoed, not sure if I'd heard right. She shrugged. Just not filtered, not as curated. We're aiming for a more aesthetic tone, you know? I wanted to scream. That's your fiancé's childhood, I wanted to say. That's your future husband, messy and joyful and real. That's what love looks like. But I didn't. I packed the photos back into the envelope and said nothing. When I left that night, Diane hugged me with one arm, wine glass still in the other. Taylor waved from the kitchen. Andrew walked me to the door, finally speaking in a whisper once we were outside. I'm sorry if tonight felt awkward. I looked at him, really looked. His face was tired, not from work, not from wedding stress, from the weight of keeping the peace between two worlds. I'm not upset, I said, and I meant it. But Andrew, do you even see what's happening? He rubbed the back of his neck. She's just under pressure. Her mom, the planner, the posts online, everyone's got expectations. I just want things to go smooth. At what cost? I asked, softer now. 62. Euro 45, 45,000. Euro 46, 25,000. What are you sacrificing so things go smooth? He didn't answer. I kissed his cheek and walked away. In the car, I sat for a long time staring at the glow of their house, the curated lighting, the perfect furniture, the two people inside who decided my presence didn't match their picture. And I realized I wasn't invisible because I had nothing to offer. I was invisible because I reminded them of things they didn't want to see. Depth, history, substance, things you can't filter into a hashtag. The next morning, I took the wedding fund out of its hiding place. 20 years of saving, sacrifice, meant to be a gift, meant to be a blessing. I looked at the number, at the little notebook beside it where my late husband had written, "For Andrew's Day, make it count." I stared at it for a long time. Then I took a breath, and I made a decision that would change everything. I had the checkbook in my purse, the one with the soft leather and initials embossed in gold, MD. A gift from my husband, back when people still gave each other thoughtful things. I told the teller I needed to modify an account, a withdrawal, and a partial transfer. The young woman smiled, clicked her polished nails against the keyboard, and asked no questions. To her, it was just another transaction. To me, it was the last string tying me to an illusion. The doll we had saved wasn't just money. It was love in numbers, sacrifice in digits. My husband and I had put away little by little, through hard years, good years, lean years. He always said, "Someday we'll give him the wedding we never had, the kind that tells him he's loved." And I had held on to that promise, through widowhood, through lonely holidays, through every dream I shelved so Andrew could dream bigger. But love is not blind. Love sees clearly, and chooses anyway. What Andrew had chosen was a woman who saw me as obsolete. What I had chosen for too long was silence in the name of peace. I wasn't going to fund my own erasure. So I left a symbolic $2 in the account, just enough to keep appearances. The rest I moved to a private savings account under my name. No announcement, no confrontation, just a quiet boundary, finally drawn. That night, I wrote a note, a short one, folded it into an envelope with a check for the Dear Andrew and Taylor, as you prepare for your big day, I wanted to offer a small contribution. I trust you'll make it beautiful and meaningful in your own way. Wishing you both joy, always. With love, Mom. I sealed it and mailed it the next morning. A week passed. No call, no thank you, just radio silence. Then, one evening, Andrew came over. Alone. No warning. I opened the door and saw it on his face. Tension, confusion, a thread of guilt. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Can we talk?" We sat in the living room. I offered tea. He declined. He didn't waste time. "Taylor saw the check," he said. "She was surprised." I nodded. I imagined she would be. She thought, well, we both thought you were planning to cover more, like the full amount. "I know," I said gently, "but I changed my mind." He blinked. "Why?" I met his eyes. "Because I wasn't invited to be part of anything. Not the venue, not the decisions, not the vision. I was asked to stay in my lane, so I did." His jaw tightened. "It's not like that. Taylor just wants control. She gets overwhelmed easily. She's trying to make things perfect. Perfect doesn't mean excluding the people who love you," I said. "And overwhelmed isn't an excuse for disrespect." He didn't respond right away. I watched him, my son, now a man torn between loyalty and truth, between the image he thought he had to maintain and the reality I refused to ignore anymore. "She feels like you don't support her," he muttered. I raised an eyebrow. "Does she feel that because I tried to offer ideas? Because I brought photos of your childhood? Because I wanted to help?" He looked down. "I wasn't going to say anything," I continued. "I was going to keep smiling, keep swallowing. But the truth is, Andrew, you let it happen. You stood there and watched me be erased." He looked up, pain in his eyes. "That's not fair." "No," I said softly. "It's just true." Silence hung between us. Finally, he sighed. "So, that's it? You're not going to help at all?" "I did help," I said, "in the way I was invited to." He stood, rubbed the back of his neck. "Taylor's gonna freak out." I didn't answer. I didn't offer comfort, because I was done patching wounds I didn't cause. He left not long after, barely saying goodbye, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't cry after he walked out, because I wasn't mourning the money. I was mourning the moment that never came, the one where I got to be a mother of the groom in a family that saw my value. But I also knew something else. They weren't ready for the cost of pretending I didn't matter, and soon enough, they'd learn that when you cut someone out, you don't get to cash in on their love. The theatrical pacing in those expensive flats, the wounded princess routine, equal parts fury and insult. "She says she feels betrayed," Andrew said. Finally, when I called him back, his voice was low. Tired. She thought you were going to fund the entire wedding. She's already committed to things. I bit the inside of my cheek. Committed with money she didn't have? That's not the point, Mom. No, I said gently. I think it is. What followed was a long pause. Then, the phrase that made my stomach sink. She signed a contract with the planner. My blood ran cold. You signed something? I asked. Without the funds secured? It's a social media deal, he said quickly. Savannah Bloom. She's really popular. She's got like 2 million followers. She only takes a few clients a year. Taylor messaged her, and she agreed. We had to move fast. And how much? I asked. He hesitated. Andrew, how much? 55,000. I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter. You gave someone you've never met? Someone you found online? $55,000? She's got tons of videos. Mom, testimonials, pictures. She's legit. Is she licensed? Another pause. Does she have a company registered? A business address? References? Taylor handled that part. I felt sick. I saw it playing out in slow motion. The blind trust, the rushed decisions, the desperate need to impress. The kind of mistake you only realize after it's too late. Mom, we had no choice, he continued. Taylor already turned down the other planner we interviewed. She's already telling people we hired Savannah. I closed my eyes. And now the wedding depends on her showing up. She'll show, he said, but I could hear the crack in his confidence. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I'd done what I needed to do. I had removed myself from the collision course, but that didn't mean I wanted to see them hurt. Not truly. Still, it wasn't my job to rescue them anymore. A few weeks passed. I stayed quiet, focused on my own life, walks in the park, lunch with friends, reading late into the night. It was lonely, but also peaceful, the kind of peace that comes from not pretending anymore. Then, the call came. I was in the middle of pruning roses in the backyard when my phone rang. I almost didn't recognize Andrew's voice. It was hoarse, shaky. She's gone. I froze. What? Savannah. She took the money. The website's down. Her numbers disconnected. Her Instagram's wiped. I sat down slowly on the garden bench. We've been scammed, he said, voice breaking. It's all gone, Mom. Every penny. I didn't speak right away. What do we do? He asked. What does Taylor say? She's not talking to me. The irony tasted bitter on my tongue. She's blaming me, he whispered. She said I should have convinced you, that this wouldn't have happened if we had just used your money. I stood up, walking slowly back toward the house, one step at a time. That's not true, I said. This happened because you both acted like the money, and my experience, were guaranteed. Like they owed you something. He was quiet. I'm sorry, he said finally. But apologies don't rebuild what arrogance destroys. In the weeks that followed, I learned bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances. The wedding was off. Postponed, they said at first, but it was clear that was a cover. Vendors canceled. Deposits were lost. Tension turned to blame. Blame turned to resentment. And soon enough, the engagement crumbled. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out. I stayed in my lane, just as they asked. And from my lane, I watched everything fall apart. Because that's what happens when you build a wedding on exclusion and ego, and forget to leave room for wisdom. Months passed. Quiet ones. The kind of quiet that echoes. At first, the silence burned. I would check my phone more often than I'd admit, hoping for a text, an email, even a one-word message. Hi. Anything to show me he still remembered I existed. But nothing came. No apologies, no explanations, no closure. He had vanished into the wreckage of a dream he built without me. And I stayed still. I filled my time with small things, mundane things, morning walks to the market, afternoon coffee on the porch, an online book club I never spoke in, but always followed. I repainted the hallway in a soft sage green, cleaned out closets that hadn't been touched since my husband passed, sorted through years of belongings that held more memories than function. And piece by piece, without even realizing it, I started to feel lighter. There was something strange about it. The realization that I no longer had to mold myself around other people's expectations. That I didn't have to squeeze into a role someone else assigned me. I wasn't the planner mom anymore. I wasn't the hostess, or the helper, or the savior. I was just Margaret. And for the first time in years, that felt enough. It wasn't joy exactly, but it was peace. I started saying yes to invitations again. Lunch with Diane from the library board, a garden tour in the suburbs with Joan, an old friend from church, a ceramics class where my bowl came out lopsided and I laughed harder than I had in years. And slowly, I began to remember who I was before I spent so much time trying to be what other people needed. It was strange how easily I'd forgotten. I didn't erase Andrew from my life. His picture still sat on the mantel. I still kept his favorite snacks in the pantry, out of habit, but I stopped holding my breath for him to come back. That wasn't my job anymore. I was healing in silence, the way some wounds require. No drama, no announcements, just quiet, deliberate self-respect. Then, one afternoon, I ran into Diane, not Taylor's mother, but my friend Diane, at the grocery store. She asked if I'd heard about Taylor. I shook my head. She moved back in with her mom, she said. Can you believe it? After everything? I could. She's telling people Andrew ruined the wedding, Diane added. But I heard it wasn't just the planner. They were fighting before that. Something about her wanting more control than he was willing to give. I didn't respond. Because deep down, I knew it had never been about one wedding, or one planner, or one decision. It had been about power, image, ego, and relationships built on those things don't survive the first storm. Later that night, I sat alone in the living room, the lights low, a book open on my lap that I hadn't touched in 20 minutes. I stared at the fireplace, not lit, just there, and thought about all the versions of myself I'd tried to be for other people. The fixer, the forgiver, the quiet peacemaker. I'd been all of them, but none had brought me the love I thought they would. And now, in the stillness, I saw the truth. Love doesn't require you to shrink. Love doesn't ask you to disappear. It welcomes you, flaws and all, or it's not love at all. That night, I slept without waking, without dreams, without the ache of regret pulling at my ribs, because I had stayed in my lane, yes, but I had also chosen to drive forward, and I wasn't looking back anymore. The planner, Savannah Bloom, the one Taylor had idolized like she was a deity in heels, was officially exposed as a fraud. Not just with Andrew and Taylor. She'd scammed at least 4 other couples across the country. The story broke on a local news site first, then a wedding blog, then the evening news. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, watching the segment. There was her photo, filtered, polished, with that signature, quirky luxury aesthetic Taylor had fawned over. Beneath it, the headline, "Social Media Wedding Planner Vanishes with Hundreds of Thousands in Client Deposits." I didn't cheer. I didn't say I told you so. I just stared at the screen and let the numbness settle. Because this wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy, one they'd authored themselves. The footage showed couples crying. One woman saying her father had taken out a second mortgage. Another couple had to cancel their honeymoon. And then there were the Davis names, Andrew and Taylor, mentioned in a brief sentence as local victims of the scheme. Victims. The word sat heavy in my mouth. Sat. Because while they were certainly defrauded, while I'd never wish financial loss or embarrassment on them, I couldn't shake the deeper unspoken truth. They weren't just victims of a scammer. They were victims of their own hubris. Taylor wanted a spectacle. Andrew wanted peace. Neither wanted the kind of help that didn't come with hashtags or influencers or aesthetic-approved vendors. They wanted to control the narrative until it unraveled. And now, it had. From what I heard, through friends, through whispers, Taylor was blaming everyone but herself, the vendor, the algorithm, even Andrew. The engagement, already frayed, collapsed under the weight of disappointment. I saw it coming. Not because I was cynical, but because I'd seen it too many times before. As a planner, I watched couples build weddings like they were performances, not promises. And when the stage fell apart, so did the script. Taylor moved out a week later, back to her mother's. Andrew stayed in the apartment alone. He didn't call me. Not then, but I knew he would. You don't lose everything, and not eventually look back to what was real. And I was real. I had always been. Still, I didn't sit around waiting. Instead, I started saying yes to more of my life, volunteering at the library, hosting a Sunday brunch for some retired teachers I hadn't seen in years. I joined a writing group, wrote about my years in the business, told stories with laughter and grace and not an ounce of bitterness, and I began to feel something new blooming inside me. Not just peace, but pride, because staying in my lane hadn't been passive. It had been powerful. I had chosen dignity over drama. And while they chased illusions, I stood still and watched the truth reveal itself without lifting a single finger. It turns out, silence can be louder than any revenge, both of us clutching our bags, trying to beat the rain. "Did you hear?" she asked, barely concealing her curiosity. I already knew what was coming. They called it off, Taylor and Andrew. I pretended to be surprised. I even added a soft, polite, "Oh?" because that's what you do when someone wants to tell you something you already understand more deeply than they ever will. "She moved out. Her mom came to help pack," Marlene continued. "He's still in the apartment. Looks kind of lost." I thanked her, wished her a good day, and walked back to my car in the drizzle. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there and let it sink in. It wasn't joy I felt, and it wasn't relief either. It was clarity. Because when something ends, especially something that was never built to last, it doesn't need applause. It just needs acknowledgement. I thought back to the night Andrew first told me he'd proposed, the sparkle in his eye, the blind hope, the belief that he'd found something true. And I thought of all the times I'd tried to warn him without wounding him, tried to support without surrendering, tried to be included without begging. He hadn't seen me. Not then. And Taylor? She had never looked past her own reflection long enough to see anyone at all. I was sad, not for the wedding that never happened, not for the money or the spectacle, but for the illusion, the years Andrew would carry, the realization he'd been chasing approval, not love. That's what hurt the most, that he'd given everything to someone who had only seen him as a character in her curated story. And I, the woman who knew him best, had been written out of the script entirely. I didn't call him. I didn't reach out. Not because I was angry, because I had learned. You can't teach people to value you. They have to choose to. So I waited. And in the meantime, I filled my days with life, real life. I started leading a workshop at the community center, helping young women plan weddings on tight budgets. Not for profit, not for recognition, just to pass along what I knew. What I had earned through years of sweat and heartbreak and joy. They listened. They asked questions. They wrote things down. And for the first time in a long time, I felt heard again. One evening after the workshop, I walked home through the crisp November air. The sun was setting early, casting everything in gold. I stopped by the small park down the street, sat on a bench, and watched as a little girl tried to fly a kite that kept dipping and crashing. Her father kept encouraging her. "Try again. You've almost got it." And she did, over and over, laughing, failing, laughing again. It hit me then. How many times I had tried to make my relationship with Andrew something it wasn't ready to be. How many times I'd thrown myself into the wind, only to fall, only to be told I was too much or not enough. But I wasn't a kite. I didn't need someone else to lift me. I had built my own wind. That night, I slept with the windows cracked open. The cold air was sharp, honest, like the truth, sometimes uncomfortable, but always necessary. And in that quiet, I forgave him. Not because he asked, but because I was finally done carrying a weight that wasn't mine. He was standing near my front gate when I turned the corner. I stopped walking. He looked the same, and yet not. Thinner, older, not in years, but in wear. Life had settled into the lines around his mouth. His shoulders didn't carry the same weightless confidence anymore. There was something grounded there, real. "Hi, Mom." My heart stuttered, not from anger or sadness, but from the unexpected tenderness of hearing that word again from him. "Mom." I unlocked the gate, pushed it open and stepped through. "You hungry?" I asked. He smiled, nodding. "Starving." We didn't talk about Taylor over lunch. Instead, we talked about small things, his job, the book he was reading, a podcast he liked. I let him fill the space, like a boy coming home after a long journey, slowly unfolding the truth between casual sentences. And then, at the end, when the dishes were cleared and the kettle was whistling, he said her name. "Her name's Emily." I turned around. "Oh, she's different," he said quietly. "Soft, kind. She asks questions. She listens." He paused. "She asked about you the first time I told her about my past. Not about the wedding. About you. Said she wanted to meet the woman who raised me." I felt something stir inside me, cautious, quiet hope. "She's not trying to prove anything," he added. "She doesn't need to control the story. She just wants to build something good." I handed him a cup of tea, our old rhythm returning without effort. And you? I want to do it right this time. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside, a photo. Emily standing in a garden, sunlight catching in her hair, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. She said, if we ever get married, she'd want you to plan it, he said, eyes meeting mine. She said it would be an honor. I looked at the photo, not because I needed to judge, but because I wanted to see the woman who saw me. And what I saw in her face wasn't sparkle or flair or fashion. It was warmth. I placed the photo down gently, my fingers lingering for just a second longer than necessary. I'd like that, I said. And I meant it. Not for the second chance, not for the event, but because for the first time I was being asked in, not expected, not taken for granted, not assumed, invited. Later that evening, after Andrew had gone, I sat at the kitchen table with a new notebook, blank pages, clean start. I wrote her name at the top, Emily, and beneath it, I started a list, not of decorations or colors or seating charts, but of feelings I wanted her wedding to hold: joy, honesty, gentleness, gratitude. Because this wasn't about getting it perfect. It was about getting it real, and this time, I was ready, somehow. It wasn't the first time I'd been asked to help plan a wedding, but it was the first time I'd felt seen as I worked. It wasn't just about executing a vision anymore. It was about sharing one. And for the first time in years, I realized how much I had missed being part of something real, something that didn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. Emily and I spent weekends together. She'd bring over coffee, we'd talk about fabric swatches, seating arrangements, and her family's desire to have an outdoor ceremony. Sometimes, we just talked about life, her work, her dreams, how she'd grown up in a small town in the Midwest, and how she had never wanted a big wedding. She just wanted it to feel like her. And I realized more than anything that this wasn't a job for me. This was something I'd been waiting for, a moment to contribute, not just to their happiness, but to mine. We chose a small venue in a nearby garden, one that had personal significance for Emily and Andrew. The ceremony would be intimate, just close family and friends. No frills, no overstated trends. It was simple, but it was theirs. One afternoon, while we were finalizing the details, Emily stopped and looked at me, her eyes wide with gratitude. "You're so good at this," she said, shaking her head. "I wish I had known about you sooner. You've made all of this so much easier, so much more real." I smiled, a small part of me feeling the weight of those words, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just a mother or a planner or a daughter of someone who had faded into the background. I was seen for what I truly was, someone who knew how to craft memories. And that's what this wedding was turning into. Not a series of decisions made by Instagram influencers or social media gurus. Not a curated aesthetic, but a collection of moments, threads, and feelings that connected people to what truly mattered. Emily and Andrew had made their own choices, their own mistakes, but they were building something real, piece by piece. And this wedding wasn't a performance. It wasn't a show. It was their declaration, a promise to each other that was grounded in love, not perfection. The day of the wedding came. The weather was perfect, sunny but cool, the kind of early fall day that makes you believe in second chances. Andrew stood at the front in a simple suit, his hands trembling ever so slightly. He looked over at me and smiled, a gesture of quiet appreciation, like a man who had finally figured out what truly mattered. When Emily walked down the aisle, the guests didn't gasp or whisper. They just watched, content. There was nothing over the top about the scene, just two people, their eyes locked on each other. Two people who had learned, who had made mistakes, but were ready to get it right this time. As she stood before him, she took his hand and spoke her vows, simple words, honest words. They didn't promise to be perfect. They didn't promise forever without hardship. They promised to choose each other, day after day, to walk beside each other no matter what came their way. And in that moment, I realized something. I had been holding my breath for so long, waiting for everything to fall into place, waiting for the apology, waiting for recognition. But the moment I had been waiting for, it wasn't coming from anyone else. It was coming from me. I had already forgiven. I had already healed. And now I could let go of the past, for good. The ceremony ended. The reception began. The food was simple but delicious. The music was soft, and there was no grand dancing, no centerpieces of glass and gold, just laughter, conversation, and the warmth of people who had come together not for spectacle, but for love. Later that evening, as the last of the guests left, Andrew and Emily came over to me. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me tightly. "Thank you," he whispered. This was everything." And Emily, her eyes shining with the kind of gratitude I had only ever dreamed of, placed her hand gently on my shoulder. "You were the heart of this. Margaret, I can't imagine what this day would have been without you." I didn't need any more words. I didn't need any more validation. I had been part of something real, and as the evening wound down, I stood by the edge of the garden, watching Andrew and Emily dance their first dance, not the perfect, flawless performance, but the awkward, imperfect, joyous sway of two people who had chosen each other. I smiled to myself. I had stayed in my lane, but in doing so, I had found my way back to them, back to the love I'd always been part of, not as a mother of the groom, not as an organizer, but as Margaret. And that was enough. I didn't hear much from Andrew right away, not because he didn't want to, but because, for the first time, he didn't need to. The weight of the past had shifted, and what had been fractured was slowly beginning to heal. We didn't have to talk every day or every week. The distance between us had never been about love. It had always been about expectations. And now, we both understood that love didn't come with strings. It didn't come with labels or roles. It simply came, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, but always with acceptance. I had learned to give him that. He had learned to give me the same. One evening, about a month after the wedding, Andrew called me. "Mom," he said, "I'm with Emily. We were talking about the wedding, about you." I paused, a bit surprised. "What about me?" "Well," Emily said something. He was quiet for a moment. "She said that if she could have had anyone plan her wedding, it would have been you. She thinks you're the heart of everything, that what you do isn't just about making things beautiful. It's about making people feel something." I could hear the sincerity in his voice, and it hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't asked for gratitude. I hadn't expected anything in return. But hearing those words, hearing him acknowledge what I had done for them, not just as a planner, but as a mother, a woman who had always given so much of herself to those she loved, made something inside me shift. It was like I was seeing the pieces of me I'd forgotten, the parts that had always been there, even when others couldn't see them. "I think she's right," I said softly. "I've always loved creating moments for people, but I needed to know they were mine to create, not because I was expected to, but because I wanted to." "I get that now," he replied. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." I sat back, feeling the comfort of those words settle around me. It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't about fixing everything or erasing the past. It was simply about acknowledging what had happened and what had changed, and that was enough. We talked for a while longer, about the future, about Emily, about life. Nothing profound, just the mundane, comforting details of everyday life. After we hung up, I sat quietly in the kitchen. The evening sun was fading, casting a warm golden glow through the window. I thought about everything that had happened, the years of hard work, the dreams I had poured into others, the moments when I had been told I wasn't enough, the way I had bent over backward, time and time again, for a family that hadn't always seen me. And then I thought about the present, about Emily, who had welcomed me into her life with open arms, not as a requirement, but as a choice. About Andrew, who had finally found his way back to me, not in apology, but in recognition. I had stayed in my lane. I had held my boundaries, quieted my voice when it wasn't wanted, but when the time came, I had spoken, not with anger or regret, but with calm strength. And in the end, I had found peace. Because sometimes, when you stay true to yourself and let go of the things that don't serve you, when you stop forcing things and let life unfold on its own, the universe has a way of bringing everything back to where it belongs. I was enough, and that was the most freeing thing I had ever learned. Later that evening, as I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, I heard footsteps coming up the driveway. I looked up to see Emily walking toward me, smiling as she approached. "I just wanted to say thank you again," she said, sitting beside me, "for everything, for making it so real, so perfect." I smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone who was just doing their job. It was the smile of a woman who had finally realized her worth. "You're welcome," I said quietly. as the stars began to twinkle above us, I realized that this moment was the one I had been waiting for all along. Not a wedding, not a grand gesture, but the quiet, soft realization that my journey had always been about me too, about finding my place, about not just being part of the story, but knowing when to take the lead. And I was finally ready to do that, not just for them, not just for anyone else, but for me. I had stayed in my lane, and it had brought me exactly where I needed to be. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.